Notion AI is becoming increasingly powerful for internal insights, but sometimes you might want to use Notion as a knowledge repository to retrieve data for your AI workflows or chat flow that's embedded externally, or maybe you're using it as part of a wider knowledge base, maybe also scraping the internet, scraping other sources. So in this video, I'm exploring how you can use the Notion MCP server to get data from your Notion workspace and get the answers from the Notion MCP into your AI chat flow to then reply back to the user with the Notion context taken into account. We're using Flowise AI for the example chat flow build, and then sending a webhook to a make scenario that retrieves data using the Notion MCP server and streams that data back to the Flowise chat flow to send a response to the user. So that's a simplification of the workflow. And we use make because Flowise AI currently doesn't allow MCP servers that require auth 2.0, and the Notion MCP server does require that. So that's why we are sending data through a webhook to make and then getting it back in Flowise. Otherwise, we could centralize all of this in Flowise AI. First, I will show an example of how this works and then explain better the meaning. This is an agent flow in Flowise AI, which means we can use multiple agents, multiple sources for the agents, and do AI orchestration as opposed to a chat flow. So in here, if I were to send a message, you can see the flow gets processed. There is the first agent that sends the query, and then we do an HTTP request to make, to send a webhook request with the query. Then I use OpenAI to formulate the question as accurately as possible to get the best answers from the Notion MCP client and searching across the Notion workspace. So we connect in here. Once the Notion MCP provides the output, we send the response back to the Flowise agent flow in this case, and then you can see the agent flow provides the answer. In here, I can also see the steps that were taken and the content that was found for each node in here in Flowise. And then in make as well, I can visualize the response from the Notion MCP. I can visualize the reframed prompt from OpenAI in this case. And that's what the question was. And then we pass this question to the Notion MCP to search across the workspace. We can also define a specific database, a few databases, or a specific team space in Notion to search through, although I'm not going to discuss this in much detail in this video. So let's look at a breakdown of each node in here and how this works. First, there is the start input. That's a chat input. I can also select the form input, but in this case, let's say we want to build a user-facing chat that maybe we can embed somewhere. We can build a front-end user interface to make someone interact with this. And maybe Notion is just one of the sources of knowledge that we use, because that's when it can become actually powerful. Otherwise, using Notion AI directly might be much more effective, and you don't need to set up any of this. Then there is Agent 1 that uses OpenAI, although we can use any other model in here, and then set the parameters, the model, temperature, and anything else needed for this connection. If you do not have a connection, you will need to connect your OpenAI account by going to your organization, getting your API key, and then pasting it in here. Also make sure that you have credits in your account so that API calls do not fail. And the purpose of this first agent is to format the input as a valid JSON so that we can pass it to the make webhook, and then we can parse through the answer from the MCP tool, So the input message in here is format this input as valid JSON. The input is query, colon, and then there is the question. That's a variable taken from the start, meaning the chat message that every time we send to make then output only the JSON and nothing else, only output the JSON without any extra characters so that we reduce the chances of failure. That's a user message. And so once this is done, if we look at the steps in here, we can see the agent for output this query, which is valid JSON query, and then the query in quotation marks. In here, I can also visualize the usage in terms of tokens and how much time it took. And then the HTTP node just sends a request to make with the body being JSON and passing the variable from the agent 1 that we just saw. So what the HTTP node does is it provides then the output, because once we send the webhook, then the make scenario starts. Here we get the query. That's the JSON body that I just showed you. We then pass that query to the OpenAI module with the prompt to format this as a clear question, optimize the search across our internal database via Notion MCP. And then we get the result with a clear question that increases the chance of accuracy. And then we use the MCP client tool with the Notion MCP server. And the reason why we do this, as I mentioned at the beginning of this video, is because the Notion MCP server requires auth 2.0, which currently Flowise AI doesn't support. Make does support it, and that's why we're using this sort of trick to bridge that gap, to use Notion MCP in Flowise, essentially, by using Make as a bridge. So the MCP tool is the search tool, and then the query is the result from the OpenAI module. That's the question there. And then the MCP tool provides all the results in here from the Notion workspace. And then we just have a webhook response module that sends a 200 with the parsed results from the Notion MCP tool. And once this is done, we then go back to Flowise. So the HTTP node gets the response just like it did here. That's all the output passed directly from Make with all the sources here. And then agent 0, which is the last one here, is the agent that actually interacts with the user. So here's where I'm using OpenAI, although we can use any other thing, any other model. We then have a system message. That's the prompt, the main prompt of this agent. We can also connect document stores. We can connect vector embeddings here. That's why it can become powerful, because, for example, we can also connect Pinecone with all the embeddings that we have, maybe from different sources that we've accumulated over time. And so you can see that then the input for this agent becomes multi-layered. And so it can be much more accurate and powerful to combine multiple tools and embeddings together. And the input message of this agent is the response from the HTTP node. So that's the variable output from the HTTP agent flow node. And then we respond as a user message. So in the chat, we can then see the response parsed directly from the Notion MCP server, essentially. You can see here, it also provided some references. Although there are no links, this could be resolved. I know it can be resolved by providing a better prompt or making sure that the output includes the URLs, which right now it doesn't, as you can see. That's just a bug that can be resolved with some further iterating on the prompt. For this example though, that's what I wanted to show you. That's how we can connect Flowise AI to Make and run the Notion MCP server easily. This could also be done with other MCP servers that require Auth 2.0 until this is fully supported in Flowise, at which point we can just use the MCP tool in here. We can do custom MCP if the tool that you want to use is not supported directly natively. And then in here, we can actually get the config and do the authentication from here. Usually if it is an API key, for example, then we'll just include that in the config, possibly as an environment variable, not hard-coded in here. And there is a guide on how to do that in the MCP client documentation on Flowise AI. That is it for this video. Do let me know what you think in the comments. You will find relevant links in the description of this video. If you wish to work together to build your workflows and automations with or without AI, you will find the contact information in the description of the video as well. For now, thanks for watching and see you in the next one.